much. Good morning all. Karibu Taka Thursday. Today we are going to have a conversation with our guest, and we are going to be discussing on how countries can be able to transition and achieve circular economy. Karibu Ebenezer.
Asante sana, Mary. And I'm happy that you invited me to your beautiful grounds here at Taka Amadi.
Tell us about you, who you are, and then you tell us also what you do.
Great. To begin with, so my name is Ebenezer Amadi. I work for the Kenya Private Sector Alliance.
Yes.
As a program manager, and I manage a program called Sustainable Inclusive Business. But beyond that, I was laughing because I was making an introduction some time back, and I introduced myself as a DJ school dropout, a finance specialist, circular economy enthusiast, sustainability expert, governance expert, as well as as a former dancer.
Okay, how can you be an expert of so many things, Ebenezer?
It's because my career took a different path. So I specialize in finance. So I have a bachelor's and specialize in finance. I have an MBA and also specialized in finance. So I find myself in the finance sector, but with a focus on WASH. So WASH, that is water, sanitation and hygiene. And then I moved to an international non-governmental organization focusing on WASH. So I was a WASH advisor, WASH specialist, so dealing in governance, looking at their financial reports. So I understood also more about the water sector. So if you talk to me sometimes you might think I'm an engineer, but I'm not. Then now I'm dealing with sustainability issues, private sector, and in policy as well. So quite understand a lot of policies right now. So that's how then I'm a bit diverse.
So I hear today topic being very good for you because you have transited from many areas. So as we are talking about how countries can be able to transition, then you are an expert in understanding the dynamics of transition.
Yeah.
You've talked about the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and you have said that you are program manager for SIB. What is SIB doing?
So Sustainable Inclusive Business is a knowledge center under the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. So we began SIB as a project funded by the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and then we now transitioned it into a program. So we were doing two things. So one was to create awareness on sustainable business practices, and two was to support the private sector to adopt those practices. Now when we transitioned into a program, now we then focus into four thematic areas. So we have circular economy, climate change, people power, and redefining business values. So we do support the private sector on those particular areas. And of course, we have an interface where we deal with policy. Of course, KEPSA is the voice of the private sector, and what we do is to create an enabling environment for businesses. So we do this through influencing policy, advocacy, and we have 18 sector boards. So the sector boards mirror the ministries, and we have conversations, so we call it public-private dialogue. So as Sustainable Inclusive Business, we are very eager to support countries to transition to circularity. And just to break it down, circularity is an aspect that talks about redesigning out waste, right? So you're trying to talk about utilizing the products and materials that you have that ideally people will term as waste. And a bigger percentage of the waste that we generate goes to the landfills, and we don't want this to happen. Of course, the waste being generated also contributes to emission of greenhouse gases. So there's also actually a link to climate change. So we did a research in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, looking at the circularity of 5 waste streams. So we looked at paper, glass, metal, organic waste, and glass. And we realized, looking at the characterization of waste, that between 55 to 60% is organic waste.
Yes.
And when you mix this up and you find yourself in the landfill, then you're not able to recover this either to make compost, manure, or rather you're not able to utilize different innovations like black soldier fly to be able to produce animal feed, animal protein. So there are a number of elements that we can be able to draw and learn as different countries and also as a region.
So I've heard you talking about circular economy as redesigning how you position your waste.
Yeah.
So we can say that we are redesigning the waste to be a resource, to also be wealth. And this is why as Taka ni mali, we keep saying that waste is wealth, Taka ni mali. So how do you think the governments can be able to encourage this transitioning of countries for circularity?
The transition, I will not say it's quite smooth. Something that I didn't mention was that we also developed a roadmap to support these countries to transition to circularity, but along those 5 waste streams. So one of the things is to create an enabling environment. So by looking at policies, laws, regulations, are they integrating the elements of circularity? Are you encouraging businesses then to utilize what we're calling waste or product streams to then utilize it as input for production? Are we having an increased awareness on innovations, technologies that the private sector and the public can utilize? So all those are what we call enabling environment to support the transition. The availability of innovation is there. We normally see that innovations mostly come from our great continent, Africa, and of course in the region, and most particularly in Kenya, because you're leading in bringing out these innovations. So I don't think we lack innovations. The only thing that probably will be there is the ability to test it, scale it, and now ensure that the entire private sector is able to utilize the innovation. So that is also a critical thing, incubating innovation and ensure that you're able to upscale it. We have seen quite a number of innovators coming in. For example, Jijenge, who are doing the paving tiles and also the fencing posts. We also have green pavers who are also doing the roofing tiles, building blocks, paving tiles, as well as the fencing posts. So we see a lot of innovation coming in and trying to reduce what is going to the landfill. We actually also see an increase in what we call the nexus between waste and energy. So what we're calling waste to energy, where we can generate biogas and also produce briquettes for, I mean, that could be used as a source of energy. We are actually then seeing an increased uptake of solar. So quite a number of innovations are coming in. Now we are talking about also having electric vehicles. I saw recently Sakaja post where he had gone to launch a factory that's having motorbikes. So we're actually in the transition, but the government then presents or creates an environment where investors can come in. They're able now to produce products, find markets, and just upscale it in that level. Because the private sector then is more or less like the engine of a country, because production, labor, all these elements to talk about factors of production then contributes to the growth of the economy.
So I hear you talking about government creating an enabling environment and also encouraging innovation. And you have cited out several innovations that have come up, especially in different sectors. You've talked about innovations in the construction material sector. You've also talked about innovations in the renewable energy, alternative energy that different users can be able to uptake. And you've also talked about an enabling environment that the government can be able to encourage these innovations and also investors to come in. And you've talked about also how businesses can be able to use or develop some of those innovations. And at Taka Mali, one of the things that we do, and we're doing this in partnership with SIB and KEPSA and other different stakeholders in our ecosystem, is to encourage those innovations for scaling. We capacity build them for scaling different models so that they can be able to get investments and they can be able to scale. But tell me, what policies are there, or which policies can be integrated by the government or by the regulator to be able to encourage or to help smooth transition in this circularity?
So in Kenya, I think we're quite ahead in terms of developing policies, laws, and regulations. Our neighbors come and learn from us and do a better job in implementation. So being in Kenya, I might cite a few. So we have the National Sustainable Waste Management Policy and Act, the Act of 2022, which basically incorporates circularity in terms of how we manage our waste, management of waste, provision of access to sanitation and water is actually a devolved function that the counties are supposed to be able to execute. The other bit there is the extended producer responsibility regulation. It's still a draft, we're still having a conversation. It's integrating an element that we call the polluter pays principle. So where a producer will be responsible for the packaging, even post-consumption. We have other laws, for example, the Climate Change Act, though in implementation is one thing that we can talk about later, looking at the council that needed to be established. We also have some elements of that within other finance laws that then encourage importation of specific technology. For example, when you talk about pure productive use of renewable energy, there was a time we had the government removing the tax on particular products that will bring in. But of course, that was, if I remember correctly, was taken out. I don't know if it was erroneously or intentional. When we were being given a cushion during COVID, when they reduced the pay as you earn, reduced the VAT, and this was also a conversation that KEPSA was pushing. So I don't know where in between, because in the law, when you change just one word, or say we have now reduced tax on all categories, if you're not careful, it will introduce tax into another category that was exempted.
Yes. So I think it's a balancing act.
It's a balancing act.
And I think this is the role of what you're saying. Yeah. But I want to hear in terms of innovations. We have agreed that circularity really requires businesses, the countries to embrace innovations. What policies are there, or what do you think are the gaps that the government needs to especially change in terms of regulation and the policy frameworks to encourage innovations? I think we have a startup bill that is on, which then would encourage a lot of startups to embrace in different technologies or different businesses or different that. And you've also talked about an innovation like Jenga.
Yeah.
The lady who is doing beautiful work with making the paving blocks, and you've also talked about the briquettes and that.
Yeah.
But I'm looking to hear more in the technology space. Yes.
In the technology space, I think it's more of action and incubating some of those technology, more so than the policies, because I think we have so many policies. If you talk about startups, then some of those issues were probably addressed in the MSME Act, in terms of trying to categorize who are the micro, or the small, or the medium enterprises. But of course, also startups have a different dynamic, because you might be a startup but coming up with a lot of capital, so you're not under micro, you're not under small, because the definition there then gives in terms of your turnover. per annum. So I think it's more on looking at policies to ensure that we are able to be able to grow and incubate the innovations that we have,
Yes.
and even implement the areas on patents and designs, so that if anyone is using your particular design, then they will pay you. That will also generate some level of income for the innovators. So I think that is the area that needs to grow more, and also just helping people to finalize and improve on their products, so that it is ready for a bigger market, for export, not just a local market. For example, if you're to look at the construction industry, if you're to look at the building blocks, then it needs to go through some serious tests, so that it is also acceptable to other markets apart from Kenya.
So I hear you asking also for support in research and development.
Research, yes.
Especially
Incubation.
for the incubation and that.
Access
so
to financing.
Access to finance.
Which is very important.
Yes.
So all those elements then support a business and within their ecosystem.
Yes.
Access to markets,
Yes.
which is another thing, where we can also link the different small producers,
Yes.
to be able to get access to market. Just the same way we use the cooperative system, where we have smallholder farmers
Yes.
having a quality assurance of a good. You all bring together, it is packaged and then sold out. You'll actually notice, we were looking at some interesting figures, and notice that different sectors really got a negative impact during COVID. But tea had a boom. It's because people were sitting at home and they were taking more tea. So there was more export. So it was actually surprising that other sectors were making more and others were going down. So you see, the potential of bringing people together and then finding a market is a model that you can actually use and replicate this in the different sectors that we have, including technology and innovation.
Yes.
So that's why I didn't talk about more on new policies,
Yes.
rather than implementation, because specifically for Kenya, that's where we are lagging behind
In the implementation.
in the implementation.
Yes.
Because I know for sure Rwanda is learning from us now that they're hearing Kenya is drafting an EPR regulation. How can we learn from that?
Yes.
And then they will go and implement it.
Yes.
And we were the first one to do that.
Yes.
and remain in awe of what is happening in Rwanda. So that part is what I see as a more missing link on the execution part.
Is it a people culture in implementation? Because we are saying that the policies are there. So it then means that the government is trying to create the enabling environment. So I think we really need to crack what is the culture. Is it the competitive culture of the Kenyans, that we look at things from competition instead of complementing? And we have also talked a lot in terms of aggregating. We aggregate and signage of resources so that we can access bigger market. And you also talked about patenting our ideas and being able to franchise those ideas so that then we can have an idea. And instead of having it just for me, I can franchise it. We do it all together. Then we aggregate and we can access bigger market.
Yes.
Those are those methods that we could be able to look into, especially so that we can scale the innovations that we are putting together.
Those are very good models that Kenya has been good at executing. But I think you brought in another element of culture and competition, where we might be in business, but I feel I need to do more alone than doing it together. But we need to also go back and understand, where did we go wrong? Because I remember back in the day, my dad used to give people lifts. while going to school, so someone will just do this and you're picked. And I think I've also at some point I was going to school. I think something happened to the car. I can't remember, but I was with my brother. We asked for a lift from a matatu, and we did not have fare, and they actually just took us in, and people contributed the fare. But where did we go wrong? It's because as a good Samaritan, you stopped to pick someone, and you were robbed. So the next time you're like, I'm not going to stop and help anyone else because I'm the good person, but I'm getting I'm getting punished for it. And people now began to reflect internally rather than as a community. So I think we need to address that slowly. So that we go back and look at what was good within our culture system.
Yes.
And take it up. I remember back in the day, my dad used to write articles in the Daily Nation, and one thing that he talked about was the banking on the unbankable. That was in 1990, and Equity was just starting to look at how do we grow our markets with what people are calling the unbankable, and that grew. I think they had seen ahead. And one of the things that we were looking at is even going to university students and say, come, you can open an account. I remember other accounts you used to open, let's say with 20,000 Kenya shillings or 10,000 when they reduced. This was like free of charge. Come and open. You can even have a zero balance.
So I hear what you're saying. They banked on the unbankable. So they created a whole new market.
Yes.
So they did not really come in to compete with the market that was there, but they developed their own market.
Yes.
And I think that has been one of the success story for Equity.
Yeah.
Now, I will take you back into the culture.
Yeah.
But before I take you back into the culture, because I think there you've said that we need to embrace, look where we are and embrace. And there's a lot of conversation that I want us to talk about, especially changing the mindset. But I will take you back now into the sustainable waste management that you talked about. And you've said that Kenya, we now have a Sustainable Waste Management Act, and we're looking into the extended producer responsibility.
Yes.
Then you have also talked about pollute and pay.
Yes, polluter pays principle. Yes,
a pollute and pay principle. So most businesses will look at it like a tax because we are being charged because we are polluting. But we have also said that there are a lot of opportunity, economical opportunity in the whole that value chain. So businesses need to look at paying, but also exploit the opportunities, the economic opportunities that are there. And I will say that I think you can tell us maybe more about what is expected in implementation of the sustainable waste management and the opportunities that would come in that implementation of the sustainable waste management.
Yeah, the opportunities are quite enormous if you look at integrating the elements of circularity, and more so in the businesses that I just spoke about. And one of the opportunity there is to improve on the surrounding our environments. I was sitting somewhere and the professor was giving a talk, and he gave a calculation on how you calculate the GDP, but said whereas water is an enabler, we never plug in water or natural resource in the equation. Even a farmer, when you're irrigating your land, you will do the mathematics of the diesel, the generator, the skilled labor, the fertilizer, never the water that you abstract from the river. Unless Warma comes and says, now you need to pay abstraction fee. But that in itself is a resource that we forget to include in the equation. So our environment we should give it as value, and we should also give it priority. That's one area that we can be able to tackle an opportunity. The other opportunity is, as I mentioned, in terms of waste, it generates greenhouse gas emissions. So it has correlation to climate change, because then if we reduce on the emissions, when we're looking at the nationally determined contributions, then we're also able to plug that in. as a low-hanging fruit. The other place is also in creating jobs. When this producer responsibility organization come in, and the informal sector actually plays a very critical role in waste management before we get to actually building the infrastructure, because we also actually need to build our infrastructure. When you talk about separation of waste at source, you separate your waste at home, and the person who comes to pick the waste puts it all back together. So it's almost like you've done nothing. So we need to match this one-to-one, so that you say, as you separate, the person who picks it as separate as you have done it, and then it makes it easy for the recycler to recover the material, and it'll actually reduce on the cost of recovery and also recycling, because if the item is dirty, you need to wash it, increasing your consumption in water, consumption in energy, time, with also labor. So your cost of recovery goes up. So there are quite a number of opportunities. Just to put it in figures, a study was done, and they noticed that the transition to circularity has a potential of $4.5 billion US.
Is this in Kenya?
In the world.
In the world, yeah.
Yes. Just a transition. That will be the potential. So you can see that the jobs will be created there. There will be a contribution to GDP. And when you say last but not least, we should flip it around and say it is last but the greatest.
Yes.
Environment.
So I hear what you're saying, and it's good that you gave earlier an example of banking the unbankable. So we can say that there are resources that have been ignored, and you're saying they could be the greatest resources that we actually have taken for granted. And I like the example of that even when you're doing the equation of your expenses, you don't include water.
We don't factor in.
We don't factor in water, yet is a resource that also can be depleted if we misuse it.
Yes.
We forget about our environment, and our environment could be the greatest resource that we need to take care of. So we don't give it the priority that is required. And I think this is why we are saying, and embracing circular economy help us to recognize or to appreciate or be conscious not to deplete the resources, but yet it is coming up with a lot of economical value, which we are saying. So it is, how do we then approach this? I want to hear maybe some of the challenges that we are looking into, and I'll give an example of what challenges that I wanted to speak about. And we talked about our culture of me, myself, and I, and not maybe looking into the community.
Yeah.
So look at business, my business secrets. I don't want to show the others what I am doing so that I can get more. But we have also talked about how can we be able to use different models so that we embrace aggregation of resources, of synergy, and all that. So I hear looking into an ecosystem of stakeholders. An ecosystem of stakeholders who complement each other, because one person cannot do it all. And I know we are talking about the implementation of the extended producer responsibility. I know we are talking about the implementation of the sustainable waste management. I've seen recommendations of counties coming up with material recovery facilities, and we have said opportunities that are there. But there are also opportunities that could minimize the bigger opportunities that could be created if people looked at it in a collaborative way. How would you speak into that? In challenge and different collaborative methods that maybe, whether it is counties or countries or businesses, can be able to embrace?
Well, if we start with businesses,
Yes.
Because that's where we sit at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and sustainable inclusive business, we're also the Secretariat of the Kenya Plastics Pact, which brings together different brands, civil society, academia, and we also have supporting organizations. So actually the Kenya Plastics Pact is the second to be established after the South African Plastics Pact in Africa, and we follow the principles of Ellen MacArthur Foundation. one of the things that we generally see as a plus in terms of collaboration, if I give you a quick example, is how companies are able to transition from using colored bottles to clear bottles. Because if everyone was working on their own, everyone will want to look at a bottle that strikes you when you're 50 meters away. You will be able to see a green. What product is that? But when the industry comes together and then they know that if you're to recover the plastic and recycle, you have to segregate it in color. So what do you do as an industry? Make it clear. So that you're able to make it easy for the recyclers to recover. The only thing that you'll play around with is your label and probably the cup, if it's a PET bottle. So you actually see the benefit of unison and speaking as a unit, as a voice in the private sector. So everyone then will follow the best practice. But if you were to leave it as all individual companies, every company will want to outshine the other. But what is it doing to the market? Introducing other colors that are making it difficult for recovery and recycling of the plastic. The other bit, if you look at the counties, we're able to look at the opportunity for counties to cross-learn and learn from one another. And look at how are you managing your waste, or how are you managing your waste. And this is what we're doing with our waste, for example. So can we share and benchmark? If you're putting up a material recovery facility, for example, let me use Nakuru. How is Nakuru managing it? And is it better to go for an engineered landfill, or is it better to do a mix of the two with the material recovery facility, or start with the material recovery facility? So all these elements then will make the counties to start moving progressively as they cross-learn with one another. For countries, the benefit here is also on the policies, harmonization of policies. So we did a quick scan of regulations, laws, and policies that were looking at single-use plastic in East Africa. And we noticed that the laws and regulations speak about different things. Rwanda did ban flat carrier bags below 60 microns, Kenya below 30. So you actually see the difference. Uganda, I think they were also looking at below 30 microns. So if you have porous borders between, but Uganda is still using their caveras, even the one for water. So,
but that is still trickling into Kenya.
Yeah, so if you have porous borders in Kenya, in Rwanda, yes, these things will find themselves in the other countries. So it's almost like 3 steps forward, 1 step backward. Yes. So but if you harmonize the laws, then and as much as you have the porous borders and these things, at least it's not in this country, it's not in this country. So where can you find it? At least you're moving as a region. Yes. So that's one thing that we're looking at in terms of harmonization of laws, regulations, and policies. The other part is also looking at what resources are we sharing. One quick example is Lake Victoria, which is in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Yes, is it? So if you're to look at that as a resource, how are we managing that resource, for example, in dealing with hyacinth? So if you do it together, it will not be that one country is doing it, and then when the wind comes, it blows it on the other side. Yes. So, but if you do it jointly, then progressively, then the water becomes more pure. And this is one thing that I'm also seeing with the environment. In 2007, I remember, because there was drought in Kenya. And at that time, I was going to Uganda by road. And the moment I crossed the border from Kenya to Uganda, I could not believe what I was seeing, because on this other side, it looked like you had burnt all your grass, and now it was, it was starting to grow. But on the Uganda side, it was green. Because now you go in and then you go into Mabira Forest. And that's why they call it the Pearl of Africa. So what is it that they're doing differently
That
the Kenya is not doing?
Yes.
I was just mentioning that I come from a county called Vihiga, and we had a Vihiga forest. At some point it was like a hill with stones because they had cut down all the trees.
Yeah.
So we need to take care of the environment, and also the resources that we are sharing are actually really important for all these countries to come together in unison, including the water catchment areas. You know, water is a key enabler, and if you want to know it, if I give you an example, I used to work in the water sector. Naivasha Water, at some point, one industry, one manufacturer was paying them half of their monthly bills, half at some point. But now I know they have diversified. But imagine at that point if this manufacturer closed shop, what happens to the water company? What happens to the people employed? What happens to their families? It's a ripple effect. Now you begin to see how, if you take that model and go back and say it's a catchment area, and trees are out, no water coming in, you're not recharging your aquifers, because then that presents a good way for you to recharge your aquifers. And you see the river uses a principle, for example, what you're using in the biosand filtration system, because the water goes through the rocks and the sand and then cleans itself. So that kind of collaboration is really key, and brings that back to the question that you asked on culture and integrating of society, where we work together as a unit. So that should come back, and we should bring it beyond our borders, to our neighbors, and I think to some extent also to the continent,
Yes.
In Africa.
And I think that's why we are having even these things like Africa Free Continental Trade, where we are creating a market for Africans. Now, you talked about, you remember, and I like what you've said, that countries look at it from a policy level, how it is that you harmonize standards, so that the standards that are operating in this country are the same, so that if we have trickle effect, it is the same. And I also remember what you said when you started and said, when you're looking in terms of incentives, even in terms of you could incentivize this, but then create a tax on another.
Yeah.
So you have also talked about shared resources.
Yes.
And you have said that this country or this county could be having these resources. You're utilizing that, but you're depleting or you're affecting the neighbor country and all that. How do we then, and from what I hear, and this is what I want to say as Taka Nimali, what we are doing is to building together an ecosystem of different stakeholders, because we realize that it is necessary that stakeholders are able to have a conversation so that you understand my decision, how is it affecting the next stakeholder. You've talked about, if I'm making bottles and I want to have a product that strikes on the shelves, that is my objective, but that affects the industry of the recycler because it creates more work. But by the time I'm designing, if I'm designing with the stakeholders in mind, it then means that we have an end-to-end solution that looks across the whole value chain. And this is what we are saying. We are talking about closing the loop. You need to have a loop that communicates so that I understand, when I do this, how is it affecting the next? How is the next affecting that? Especially when we are looking into the matters of environment. And we keep saying that environment is... I give an example in a business. We will have a department that is taking care of the environment. In the government, we have a ministry that is taking care of the environment. But environment cannot be a standalone. It has to be a space where all the stakeholders are contributing. So there is need for every person to understand the whole conversation around environment. And we've talked about our culture. And I'm saying, like, what do you think is the role of capacity building and the role of awareness, creating awareness, around the things that needs to be done for the environment, for the circular economy, and for all these things that we are talking about, so that we can be able to get a good transition, or we can be able to embrace circularity.
So the transition is quite key, and every player has a role to play, and bringing them together. I mean, you talked about closing the loop, and I asked myself, where did this come from? Probably it came from communications, where I looked at, once you communicated, how do you get the feedback, right? Because it's at some point where you have a broken telephone, then it means the message is not being passed, and that affects either if it's in production, efficiency, it's affecting so many things, and the instruction gets lost somewhere. So the sense of bringing the community together is actually, and stakeholders together, is actually really key and strong, because then we should be able, I remember the debates in school sometimes, where you could share different opinion, but it's not, you're not attacking the person, but you're presenting your point. But then at some point, the politicians took it on another level. So it was almost like a debate, but attacking the other. So you're taking it off. So, and also the politicians play a critical role, right? Because we select them. For example, the member of parliament go in and need to debate on particular laws and present our views. So they play a critical role. The business sector also plays a critical role, because now if you look at production, in increasing your exports, because now we're talking about Kenya being an export growth economy. You plug in the community, they're actually really important, because where does the food come from? It comes from the farms, and it's the community that then contributes to that. If you look at us taking care of the environment, it's actually the element of community. The government also plays its role by collecting taxes, and they need to provide services to the mwananchi. So there is a piece for everyone to bring on the table to create a complete picture. It's almost like you're drawing a picture but using dots. So every dot in that particular picture counts. And you might see it as a very small thing because it's a dot, but without a number of dots, then you miss a part of the picture. So we should not overlook the benefit of bringing stakeholders together. And you see, sometimes that, as you said, could be a ripple effect in the home, starting from the unit of society to the community, to the county, to the country, and to the region. So there's a ripple effect, and I believe when you're seated with competitive minds and brilliant minds, they also challenge you to also kind of upgrade yourself. That's why sometimes you hear in certain families, they have 5 doctors, they have, I don't know, 2 lawyers,
5 engineers.
5 engineers. Because when you're born, and then you all know all your elder siblings are doctors, and even when you go to school, they ask you, wewe unaenda kufanya nini? So that actually pushes you to do better, because now you understand your potential based on what you're seeing your siblings doing. So that pushes you a little bit. So it's almost like a push, just starting from the unit of society. So I think sometimes we misplay it, we downplay it, but it's one thing that can bring up a society. Something as simple as hope can make a person just go for a challenge again and again, with the hope that tomorrow will be a better day. So that push, then when things become better, they're like, you see, it's now working. So there are simple things that sometimes we overlook or underestimate, but those could be the push that will help us to make Kenya a better place.
So I like the example that you've given of a picture being done with dots. And it's important that we have mapped the picture that we want to draw. So we are not just throwing dots. And the government is helping us to build or to map that picture.
Yes.
But all the stakeholders need to have the big picture, and we all come in and know which dots are we putting in. So there is need for us to have that collaboration. Know, as a community, what is our responsibility in this big picture?
Yes.
What are we contributing into this? So then we start knowing what dots are we building in, as the private sector, as the businesses, as the recyclers, as the regulator. We have the big picture, but there's a role for each one of us that we need to do that. I've heard you, and I talked about capacity, and I like what you've talked about, even the role of the politicians. And for me, I look at the politicians as leaders. So there's a role in leadership that we need to make dots in this big picture, that we need to talk about that. And we cannot do it when we are ignorant of knowing exactly what is the big picture that we're talking about. So we need to capacity build ourselves to understand circularity, to understand the role of circularity in the environment, to understand the role of circularity in the environment, again, in the climate change, because we may be ignorant, but when the climate change, we are all affected.
It doesn't choose.
It doesn't choose.
And say that you didn't know.
Yes.
No floods.
Yes.
No drought.
Yes. so when the climate changes, we are all affected. So we are all saying it is our collective responsibility to understand where we play.
Yes.
And as we play, how we can build economic value from whatever it is role that we are taking in, to take care of our environment, and also to build that mitigation of climate change. So what is your parting shot for today's viewers?
A parting shot is that, as we have mentioned, that all of us have a role to play. We all a dot in the bigger picture. So you need to know what color shade of the dots. Is it dark? Is it light? Does it have a color? So that is your role. And I need us also to ensure that we take the environment seriously and incorporate it. As you mentioned, shout out to Professor Mulwa, who was talking about integrating water into the equation of calculating GDP, a natural resource. So that's your role. However small it is, keep doing it. Let's make the world a better place. Thank you.
So thank you, our viewers, for listening to us again at our Taka Thursday. And as we have promised, is to continue having this conversation with different stakeholders, with different people who can be able to help us to understand what role are we playing. We have had today the conversation, and we have said we are drawing dots. As Professor Wagare Mathai talked about the story of the hummingbird, every dot, every drop counts. So we have said again today that every dot counts. So understand what is that dot that you are painting in the bigger picture. What is your responsibility? And as we do it, then what economic value can we be able to get from that? As Taka ni mali, we say, Taka ni mali, waste is wealth, waste is a resource. So there's value in whatever it is that we are looking in as waste. Let us be able to come up with different ways of how it is that we can be able to harness that value. Thank you, and looking forward in our next show, Taka Thursday. And check us on Twitter, on Facebook. We have a lot happening on the social media. Ask questions, engage with us, be part of the movement that we are creating for Taka ni Mali, and thank you very much.